Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, May 9th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the US to send Taiwan $500 million in free weapons. So Taiwanese Defense Minister Xu Kuo-cheng said on Monday that Taiwan is in talks with the Pentagon on the US providing a $500 million weapons package that would come at no cost to Taipei. So he said this in comments to Taiwan's legislature. He said, quote, "These extra weapons will be given to us for free and will not be deducted from the purchase list, which has been delayed by the U.S." End quote. So he's saying it's not going to be weapons that they've bought. They're just going to be new weapons that the U.S. is providing them, again, free of charge. And he said that the talks have been ongoing for about 4 months. It's not clear exactly when the U.S. is going to send these, but it sounds like it's going to happen soon. And when he was asked what type of weapons Taiwan will receive, True said, quote, "They will include missiles and some logistics services to help train our soldiers so that they will be familiar with the weapons operations as soon as they arrive," end quote. He said that the items will be items readily available in the U.S. inventory. And that means that they're going to be using this presidential drawdown authority, which this is how the U.S. has mainly been arming Ukraine. And the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, it included $1 billion in presidential drawdown authority for Taiwan. So they're going to use half of that. And there has been some issues. It made it through the NDAA, but I think the appropriations committees didn't provide the funds for this. But I know the Pentagon has been working on trying to get these funds available so they could send weapons right to Taiwan. And the reason why this is a big deal is because the U.S. has always sold weapons to Taiwan uh, since 1979, when the U.S. severed diplomatic relations, formally with Taipei to open up with Beijing. The U.S. has always sold weapons, but it has not provided this type of military aid, free military aid. So it makes this support unprecedented, and it is sure to anger Beijing. When President Biden signed the NDAA into law in December 2022, that included the presidential drawdown for Taiwan. It also included State Department foreign military financing, $2 billion in loans for Taiwan to buy weapons. That hasn't been used yet. Again, they had issues with the appropriations there. And it included other measures just to increase support for Taiwan, creating a regional contingency stockpile of weapons for Taiwan. A lot of things in this bill. So when Biden signed that into law, China's PLA, the military, launched major drills around Taiwan, and they said explicitly is because of the increasing what they call collusion between the U.S. and Taiwan's what they call independence forces. So again, this presidential drawdown is the main authority Biden has used to arm Ukraine. So it really just shows how they're prioritizing this, how they're viewing it. And when members of Congress were first discussing the idea of including this in the NDAA for Taiwan last year, they said the idea was to arm Taiwan like Ukraine, but before any potential invasion. China hawks say that this must be done to deter a future war with China, but Beijing views such support as a major provocation, and it increases tensions and seems to be making, this type of support, making war more likely. All right. So the next one here, China tells the US it must respect its red lines to foster communication. So Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang and US Ambassador to China Nicholas Burns held talks on Monday as tensions are soaring between the two nations. So the meeting came after Burns, this is the US Ambassador. He said the other day that the US was ready to talk with Beijing as communications have broken down after Secretary of State Antony Blinken canceled a trip to China over the Chinese balloon that wound up in U.S. airspace. So Kin's message in this meeting was that in order to foster communications, the U.S. must respect China's positions, including its red lines over Taiwan. So Kin said, quote, "It is not possible to talk about communication on the one hand, but to keep suppressing and containing China on the other. We must respect China's bottom line and red line and stop undermining China's sovereignty, security, and development interests. In particular, we must correctly handle the Taiwan issue, stop hollowing out the one China principle, and stop supporting and condoning Taiwan independent separatist forces, end quote. And what he's talking about there when he says that the U.S. is trying to contain China, hold China's development back, that's referring to the economic measures that the U.S. has been sanctioning China's, chip industry and pressuring other countries to do so as well, Japan and the Netherlands that sell these technology that they need to make these advanced chips, and they're going along. So China, of course, is not happy about that. So I think the point is here, you have Burns saying, come on, we can talk, we're ready to talk, but they're taking all this, hostile action against China. And this conversation between Burns and Qin came as the U.S. is continuing to increase support for Taipei. And when Chinese President Xi Jinping told President Biden when they met in Bali, Indonesia, which was last November, Xi told Biden that Taiwan is the first red line that must not be crossed. But it's pretty clear that, Biden did not listen to that warning. The U.S. is not listening to these warnings. And so following the Bali meeting, the U.S. and China made a point to continue high-level talks, but the progress was reversed after Blinken canceled his trip to China. Politico reported last month that Beijing had effectively frozen high-level contacts with the U.S. and that Blinken was unable to reschedule his trip. So the Qin-Burns meeting was one of the highest-level meetings between the two sides since the balloon incident. So Qin told Burns that the two sides should handle, quote, unexpected incidents in the relationship between the two countries in a calm, professional, and pragmatic manner so as to avoid another impact on Sino-U.S. relations, end quote. And he also said that the U.S. and China should get relations back on track. And the U.S. did not really share many details of what Burns conveyed in this meeting. All I saw was on Twitter, Burns said that he and Qin discussed, quote, challenges in the U.S.-China relationship and the necessity of stabilizing ties and expanding high-level communication, end quote. So that's the message, is that, if you really want to repair relations, the U.S. has to do something. They have to stop, change what they're doing. And I don't see any sign of them doing that. And politically, there's no appetite for it. I mean, everybody is just a rabid China hawk now in D.C., and it just doesn't seem like we're turning back from this. All right, the next one's here. Speaking of which, House Republicans demand that Europe falls in line on Taiwan. So a group of House Republicans introduced a resolution, and this was last week. And this resolution would urge European leaders to affirm support for Taiwan and follow the U.S. on its policies related to the island. So the resolution was led by Representative Max Miller, Republican from Ohio, and has received 30 Republican co-sponsors, including Mike Gallagher, who's the head of this new House China Committee. And this legislation is a direct response to French President Emmanuel Macron's warning that Europe should not follow the U.S. into a conflict with China over Taiwan. So in a statement on the resolution, Miller really went after Macron. He said, quote, it is astonishing to me that the French president would even suggest siding with a communist nation over a democratic one. Our resolution asks our European friends one simple question. Do you side with Taiwan and democratic values or with an aggressive communist power that threatens the world order, end quote. So it sounds like Freedom Fries might be back soon, the way that these Republicans are talking. And in his statement on the bill, so this is Representative Mike Lawler, who's a Republican from New York. He's a co-sponsor. He said that NATO countries must be involved in the Asia Pacific. He said, quote, it is incumbent on all NATO members to strengthen their involvement with democratic partners in the Indo-Pacific to ensure safety and security in the region, end quote. According to the text of the bill, the resolution would call for transatlantic unity on Taiwan and encourage North Atlantic Treaty Organization allies to strengthen their engagement with partners in the Indo-Pacific. It would also call on European leaders to express support for maintaining the status quo in the Taiwan Strait and condemn any use or threat of force. So, taking a pretty strong stance here, and this is just another example of all this, legislation aimed at China that just keeps coming out. And this, again, I missed this. I saw Ron Paul Liberty Report. They covered this on their episode on Monday. and I went and looked it up. And yeah, I mean, it's just the way they react to what Macron's saying. It's just very revealing. Um, anyway, and just the fact that they're saying NATO countries must, expand their activity in the Asia Pacific. It's just they really have their designs on a future conflict with China, it seems like. All right, the next one here, the UK prepares to send long-range missiles to Ukraine. So Britain appears to be moving closer to sending Ukraine longer-range missiles that the Biden administration has so far refused to provide. Last week, the British Defense Ministry posted a procurement notice with the International Fund for Ukraine, which is a British-led group of Northern European countries that coordinates sending arms to Kiev. So they posted this notice, and it asked for an expression of interest in providing Ukraine with strike capabilities of up to 300 kilometers, which is about 186 miles. So a British official told the Washington Post that no final decision has been made and would not specify the type of munition that London was considering sending. The range matches the British Storm Shadow missiles, and previous reports have said that the UK was considering sending those Storm Shadows, and they are air-launched missiles that can be fired by Ukraine's Soviet-made fighter jets. According to the Washington Post, so this is the first time they reported on this, one of the Pentagon documents leaked to Discord showed that U.S. intelligence confirmed that the UK plans to eventually send Storm Shadows to Ukraine, along with personnel to help with targeting data. Now, this Washington Post report just said, again, this is apparently one of the Discord leaks that hasn't been reported elsewhere, and that's all that the Washington Post said about it, was that the U.S. expects Britain to send these missiles along with personnel. So that indicates that the British could significantly increase their role in the war if they do provide these missiles by sending troops to help with targeting, whatever that means. I wish they would publish the document. And according to another leak that we've gone over a lot, the British have 50 special operations soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. So they're not afraid to send people into Ukraine. And the U.S. has held off on providing Ukraine with the Army tactical missile systems, the ATACMS, and those are munitions that can be fired from the HIMARS rocket systems. They have a similar range of the Storm Shadows, up to 190 miles. Ukrainian officials insist that they would not use the missiles to target Russian territory, but other Discord leaks indicate that they would, as Zelensky was apparently upset that they didn't have missiles to target Russian troops inside Russian territory. So that could be another big escalation of NATO support. All right, the next one here. Ukraine's defense minister says to lower expectations of counteroffensive. So senior Ukrainian officials fear that the coming counteroffensive will not live up to the expectations of Kiev's Western backers. This is Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov. He said, quote, "The expectation from our counteroffensive campaign is overestimated in the world. Most people are waiting for something huge," end quote. So again, back to the Discord leaks, one of those documents showed that the U.S. does not believe Ukraine could regain significant territory, and then Politico reported on April 24th that current assessments say something similar. The one from the leak was an assessment from February. But behind the scenes, the U.S. is still really not expecting much. But Western officials publicly are still insisting that Ukraine has what it needs to retake territory from Russia this spring, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It sounds like he's out there just lying again about the situation in Ukraine. He said last week that Kiev is capable despite what the Discord leaks revealed. Reznikov said that Kiev's Western backers have said they need an example of success so they can show their people, as a Ukrainian failure would not bode well for rallying more military assistance for Kiev. Reznikov said, quote, "But I cannot tell you what the scale of this success would be. 10 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers," end quote. So some staunch supporters of arming Ukraine, in the U.S., including Representative Michael McCaul, he's the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He said last week, if Ukraine regains a lot of territory, it'll be good for it means we could keep supporting Ukraine. But if they don't, he says that it will have a negative impact. So Reznikov and Zelensky told the Washington Post that they were still preparing for the counteroffensive. Zelensky said they will be ready to launch the assault as soon as the weapons that were agreed with our partners are filled. Reznikov said that the first assault formation is more than 90% prepared, but some troops are still receiving training in other countries. And this counteroffensive is expected to be focused on the south if they ever really launch it. But just more doubt about it, straight from them, the high level Ukrainian officials. But you have Blinken saying otherwise. All right, I just want to mention again that it is our fundraiser at antiwar.com, and right now we have matching funds, so every dollar you give will be doubled. So it's a great time to help us out. Go to antiwar.com/donate. See the ways you could support us: PayPal, crypto, credit card, monthly donation. Set something up like that. Those are a huge help. So anything you can spare, please help us out so we could focus on our work. This is how we do it. This is how we are able to provide you with this type of coverage, is that we are entirely reader funded. And that means we have to do these fundraisers. And another thing about us is we're never going to put our content behind a paywall. And but because of that, we need to rely on support from our readers. So please help us out there. All right, back to the news. There's still a ton of stuff to go over here. The next one, Ukraine's NATO relationship may be upgraded at upcoming summit. So this is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Estonia plans on pushing the North Atlantic Alliance to present Ukraine with a clear path to full membership in the bloc during an upcoming meeting of high-ranking officials, and that is at the summit in Lithuania in July. So Estonia's foreign minister explained that they will bring up the subject of membership at the NATO summit in Lithuania. He said, quote, "We must move forward to give a strong message. It is not enough anymore just to repeat the already existing position that Ukraine is welcomed to NATO," end quote. So Kyle mentions the background that Ukraine was put on the path to NATO membership at the 2008 Bucharest summit, even though at the time William Burns, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, warned Condoleezza Rice that Ukrainian membership in NATO is the brightest of all red lines for Russia. They still went ahead and made that promise. And then the support following the 2014 coup, the NATO trainers and everything, really took NATO-Ukrainian cooperation to a new level. And, these promises and pledges that they keep making are all that it's going to do is prolong the war. Russia's main demand before invading, and it seems to be its main concern, is Ukraine's alignment with NATO. They want to make sure that it doesn't become a NATO member. So if they make these new promises, it's just going to, again, ensure that this war won't end. But that seems to be what they have in mind. So we'll see to what level they do something here. From what I understand, the U.S. doesn't really want to do this, and Germany doesn't want to do it. But then you have the more hawkish Eastern European and Baltic states really pushing it. And Zelensky wants it, so I'm sure they're going to give him something, whether it's just more kind of, rhetoric or whatever. They're going to give some kind of guarantee or some big joint statement that's going to anger Russia in some way. All right, the next one here. Ukraine's intel chief says we will keep killing Russians anywhere. So the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, known as the HUR, told Yahoo News in an interview published Friday that, quote, "We will keep killing Russians anywhere." Major General Kirilo Budanov made the provocative statement when asked about the August 2022 car bombing outside of Moscow that killed Daria Dugina, who is the daughter of the prominent Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin. Budanov said, quote, "Don't continue with that topic. All I will comment on is that we've been killing Russians, and we will keep killing Russians anywhere on the face of this world until the complete victory of Ukraine," end quote. So the HUR does not officially take credit for Dugina's killing or other attacks inside Russia, but Budanov and other officials strongly hint at their responsibility. U.S. officials told the New York Times that they believe the Ukrainian government was behind the Dugina slaying, but they did not mention the HUR specifically. So the Kremlin on Monday responded to Budanov's comments. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, quote, "This is a truly monstrous statement. This statement and what Mr. Budanov said is a direct confirmation that the Kiev regime is not just sponsoring terrorist activity, but is an immediate organizer of this activity," end quote. So over the weekend, there was a killing. Sorry, he actually was not killed. Zakhar Pralpin, who is a Russian novelist and an ardent proponent of Russia's war in Ukraine, he was targeted in a car bombing, and his driver was killed. He survived. So there's more of these targeted killings of people that support or attempted killings of public Russian figures that support the war. There was a Russian military blogger who was killed. I think that was in early April, Tatarsky in St. Petersburg. So Budanov was interviewed by Yahoo on April 24th. So that was before the latest one of these attacks. All right, the next one here. NATO on high alert after a near miss between Russian and Polish aircraft. So NATO has put its air units on high alert following a near miss between Russian and Polish aircraft. A NATO official said that on Friday, a Polish jet patrolling over the Black Sea near Romania this Polish aircraft was patrolling the area for the EU's border agency, and it had a dangerous encounter with a Russian aircraft. The NATO official said, quote, NATO air policing detachments were put on higher readiness in response to the dangerous behavior of a Russian military plane in the vicinity of Polish Frontex aircraft over the Black Sea near Romania, end quote. And Frontex is the EU's border agency. The Romanian Defense Ministry accused the Russian aircraft of acting recklessly. And since Russia invaded Ukraine last year, there have been several dangerous encounters between NATO and Russian aircraft, including the incident in March that resulted in the downing of the U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone near Crimea in the Black Sea. So according to the New York Times, this was one of the leaked documents. And it apparently, on September 29th last year, there was a near miss between a British surveillance plane and some Russian fighter jets near Crimea over the Black Sea. Apparently, one of these Russian jets, because of a miscommunication, actually fired a missile at this British surveillance aircraft, an RC-135, which, from what I understand, that's a manned aircraft. It's not a drone. There's usually a few dozen people on these types of surveillance planes. But the missile had a malfunction. It misfired in some way, so it didn't hit the British aircraft. But I mean, how close did they almost come to a NATO country being attacked like that by a Russian aircraft? And these encounters happen all the time. You got these planes flying around each other a lot, Russian and NATO aircraft. So who knows, at some point, one of these incidents could be deadly. It might not be a drone that gets downed the next time. All right. The next one here, Russians take language tests to avoid expulsion from Latvia. And this is an article from Reuters. So Russians that live in Latvia, that have lived in Latvia for a long time, some of them for decades, are being forced to take a test. The government in Latvia is demanding a language test from the 20,000 people in the country holding Russian passports, mostly elderly and female, as the loyalty of Russian citizens is a worry. So this one woman that Reuters spoke with has lived in Latvia for 40 years, and she's nervous that she's not going to pass this test, and they're saying that they're going to deport them to Russia. And she says everything, her family, her life is in Latvia. And this is just part of kind of the crackdown on Russians in this part of Europe. They banned, for the most part, Russian travelers. I think only if they have family they can enter. I'm not sure exactly of the restrictions, but I think if they have family, they could still go visit them. But this was never really a problem for these people that, Latvia is a former Soviet republic. But now, because of the war and just everything going on, that they might be they might be kicked out of Latvia because of that, if they can't speak the language well enough, I guess, to pass this test. All right. So the next one here, and this is over. Okay, so we're shifting over to the Middle East here. So looks like there's a big escalation in Gaza, and 10 were reported killed in Israeli airstrikes. So this is from Al Jazeera. At least 10 people have been killed in Israeli air raids on the Gaza Strip in what Israel's military said was targeting members of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement. Al Jazeera's Yumnan El Sayed, which is it's one of their reporters in Gaza, said that the Ministry of Health declared that 10 people were killed in the Gaza Strip and an unconfirmed number of people were injured in the Israeli air attacks. So explosions targeting residential apartments were heard at about 2 a.m. local time. So apartment buildings were hit. And this is Al Jazeera's correspondent. She said, quote, "It's not very clear the names of the people who have been killed or the number of people who have been injured. We only have the confirmation that at least 10, have been announced as killed in the latest airstrikes in different areas that are being carried out now along the Gaza Strip. Whenever there is targeting of residential apartments, there are always casualties among civilians," end quote. So that's true. They have no problem targeting these apartment buildings. And Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on earth. So just the nature of any kind of air campaign against it, even if you're targeting Hamas or Islamic Jihad, as they say they are, is going to end up killing or hurting civilians. So at least 10, I have a feeling that the death toll might go up here. So there's more information than when I read this before. So the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement announced on Tuesday that 3 of its leaders were killed in the air attacks. The 3 were killed along with their wives and some children. So kids were killed, as they usually are in Gaza. So more information is probably going to come out about this. Witnesses said that an explosion hit the top floor of an apartment building in Gaza City and a house in the southern city of Rafah. So we will probably see more. We're probably going to see some rocket attacks out of Gaza. The Israelis are saying that these people were responsible for other rocket attacks fired toward Israel. The Israeli army, they gave this a code name, Operation Shield and Arrow. That usually means that there could be more airstrikes coming. And what better to help Netanyahu distract from his political crisis than the Gaza war? So I bet that death toll is going to rise, unfortunately. All right, the next one here. This is another one from the Libertarian Institute. This is from Connor Freeman. Jake Sullivan reviewed significant progress toward Yemen peace in meeting with NBS. So Jake Sullivan, while in Saudi Arabia, he met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, and reviewed significant progress toward peace in the war-torn country of Yemen. Sullivan aimed to shore up ties with Saudi Arabia as Riyadh has been pursuing an independent foreign policy in the region, which has left the U.S. feeling blindsided. In recent months, the Saudis have normalized relations with longtime adversary Tehran, and they're leading that push to bring Syria back into the Arab League, which has happened now. So a peace deal between the Saudis and Houthis is nearing as Omani-mediated talks have been bearing significant fruit. So I guess that's what they were discussing. The White House issued a statement that said, quote, "Sullivan reviewed significant progress in talks to further consolidate the now 15-month-long truce in Yemen and welcomed ongoing UN-led efforts to bring the war to a close, as well as covering a range of other issues," end quote. The UN is not involved in the current talks, but they are expected to be involved in negotiations moving toward a more long-term settlement. So hopefully, again, we haven't seen anything signed yet, but both the Houthis and the Saudis are saying good things about these talks. They say the talks are going to continue. There's been a lot of prisoner swaps, all good signs. Hopefully the U.S. doesn't mess it up. I wouldn't be surprised if Sullivan is telling them, because of the state of things with the Saudis, they don't want to lose them too much. I bet, one of the messages that the U.S. is conveying is, hey, if this thing does flare up again, this war in Yemen, we got your back. So that's something we got to worry about, I think, is the U.S., kind of ruining the progress. All right, the last one here. Jordan launched airstrikes in Syria, killing a drug dealer and his family. So this is from the Cradle. Jordan's Air Force reportedly carried out airstrikes on southern Syria during the early hours of May 8th. Syrian and Jordanian media outlets have reported, resulting in the alleged killing of a well-known Syrian drug trafficker. The airstrikes targeted the countryside of Suwaidia and Dara and reportedly resulted in the destruction of terrorist drug smuggling strongholds. And these are unconfirmed reports. One of the things that they cite here is the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in the UK. They say that the drug trafficker Mairai El Ramthan was killed along with his wife and 6 children. So it sounds like it was a massacre of children. And the Jordanian and Syrian governments have yet to make any announcements confirming the airstrikes. So Jordan has been kind of warning that they might take action. They're saying there's a lot of drugs being smuggled in from Syria, and this is a pretty serious escalation. And it's strange. It comes after the Arab League thing, Jordan hosting that meeting with Syria. So there's always the question, is Syria cooperating with this? I don't know, because it seems like the airstrikes went beyond just killing this guy and his family. They targeted other things as well. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see some confirmation from Jordan or Syria about this in the future. But that is it for the news. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Julian Assange. This was published at Declassified UK. He sent a letter to King Charles III saying, "Come visit us at Belmarsh Prison." So go check that out. It's written very well. One from Ted Galen Carpenter. The zombie domino theory returns. We also have one from Julia Gledhill, ending the Pentagon's sunken cost buried treasure excuse. That's over at Responsible Statecraft. One from Ron Paul, NATO's great new idea, let's start a war with China. And then one from Joseph Solis Mullen over at the Libertarian Institute, the media ignores deteriorating relationships in the Pacific. Again, please help us out, antiwar.com/donate, so we could wrap up this fundraiser. If you can't help us out that way, you could always just tell your friends about antiwar.com, share it around, share the show, comment on YouTube. All that engagement is good. But that's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.